Health and magical protection. Welcome. As you'll know, I've made many vlogs on protection from magic. But I wanted to explore some of these aspects just a little further. These are all aspects that I've been considering for a very long time. But what prompted me to write this vlog was listening to Gordon White on Rune Soup, who you may have heard I've got a lot of time for. Indeed, the very subjects that I'm going to discuss do form a part of my daily jihad when I consider what is permissible and what isn't permissible for me to do. What is health? I mean, in truth, the food that so many of us eat really fails to satisfy our dietary needs. Food is so adulterated with non-food additives, can we even call it food? The world itself is so full of trauma, our mental health is under constant attack. Indeed, and I've talked about this so many times, social media seems to be promoting narcissism and psychopathy, which seems to be on an exponential rise. The degree of trauma from trolls on social media, getting cut up when we're driving, people pushing in front of us in queues, etc., has now reached, epidemic proportions. Increasingly, our every social interaction, how we interact with government services, with service providers, banks, telephone companies, electricity companies, but especially our employers, is based on psychopathic assumptions of humanity and the world. In other words, we're distrusted and treated as though we need to be punished rather than encouraged and comforted. Now this affects us all, leaving us with trapped emotions. Now many, I'm going back an awful long time, but I remember when I moved to Manchester. And don't get me wrong, I loved being in Manchester, but Manchester, maybe a bit like New York and other large cities, is a place where you're constantly on your guard. And I'd actually been living in Leicester itself, not a small city. But I remember driving to Manchester and I could feel the oppression. I could feel myself sort of getting ready for the onslaught that a big city is. And I have to say, that I felt when coming from Manchester, I now feel when coming from Gunung Kidul to Jakarta. Even though, if anything, certainly there's every bit as much magic going on in Gunung Kidul, and magic aimed against us, as there is in Jakarta. And yet I still feel it, I feel it. But do we blame others for this? And if so, who are those others? Maybe we should be really asking the question, do we fall into sickness? Now, as you may know, I'm something of a healer, and I'm all too aware that we make ourselves ill. Obviously not directly meaning something like breaking a leg or losing a limb, although even that I think you could make a case for. And therefore, if we make ourselves ill, we also make ourselves well. My only intervention is to convince others that to do this healing themselves. I would argue that medicine, be it Western or traditional, works in the same way. It's a giant placebo effect, if you like, that it convinces us that it works, and we therefore convince ourselves that we're healed. Some herbs do appear to be particularly useful for some ailments, so I guess some medicines do target maybe the right place, but even so, just like the herbs, I'm more convinced that they're just convincing ourselves, sorry I've used convinced twice there, convincing ourselves to heal ourselves. If we think of mental health, it becomes even more apparent that we make ourselves ill. But then, of course, what is mental health? What is mental illness? Increasingly in the West, and particularly in America, it's that's defined in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health. And this is getting bigger and bigger as it lists an ever-increasing number of mental disorders and the pharmaceuticals which have been approved to treat them. In other words, it's like some giant Sears catalogue. Despite more and more people being defined as mentally ill and spending more and more money on its treatment, its actual treatment appears to be going backwards. Now, prior to closing mental hospitals, I think, and I tried to check it, I couldn't find the figures, but up to 40% of the health budget was devoted to mental health. Now, of course, we spend a much smaller proportion, but most of that is spent on drugs. So we've substituted what was care, and some of it was brutal, don't get me wrong, and maybe barbaric, but not all. And what we have done is substituted what was care and listening and holding somebody's hand simply with drugs. In the UK, it was called care in the community, but looking how my schizophrenic son has been treated, I think it's much closer to neglect in the community. Yes, he's difficult, he's angry, he's manipulative, but worse still, he's a clever bastard. But he needs love and care, not his paranoia to be fed by a team of narcissists following the psychopathic assumptions of their managers. But I don't want to be among mad people, Alice remarked. Oh, you can't help that, said the cat. We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad. How do you know I'm mad, said Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. We've become progressively more neurotic since personality tests were first developed, themselves enshrining a psychopathic view of human behaviour. Indeed, the population norms are regularly updated to reflect this trend. I personally believe that humans are plagued by mental parasites which feed off our emotions. So these are now more common, creating an increase in narcissism, or has the increase in narcissism simply given them more to feed off? But I return to the question, what is mental health? Is the definition not based on our ability to hold down a job and not question the norms of a psychopathic society too much? The love of money as a possession, as distinguished from the love of money as a means to the enjoyments and reality of life, but will be recognised for what it is, a somewhat disgusting morbidity, one of those semi-criminal, semi-pathological propensities which one hands over with a shudder to the specialist in mental disease. John Maynard Keynes, Essays in Persuasion, Part 5. Magic attack. If we're cursed or attacked by someone, what does it really mean? Does it not indicate that our society is fundamentally sick and many of its people are casualties? Surely the only people that curse others are so badly damaged themselves that they believe this can be justified. And when would it be justified for you? What is a magical attack? Is it any magic that's intended to affect us, even if it's for our own good? What about love magic? What about white magic? What about white magic even if we'd not wished for it to happen? Whilst negative thoughts can produce the magic which harm us, it's even more powerful when it comes from positive thoughts. So I think I've told you before, in Jakarta our neighbour believes that the house we live in belongs to his wife's family. He knows it's been sold, but he believes rightfully it belongs to the family and he wants it back. So over 12 years he spent most of his days sitting outside my home trying to kill me. Literally sitting outside, directly facing my home, cursing me. I don't think, however, that he's thinking about trying to kill me. But he's thinking about how he will get his house back when I die. Now, I'm not saying he's not using magic. I'm not simply saying it's the evil eye. But this is where the evil eye and the magic begin to intersect. And even though he's thinking about getting his house back when I die, the effect of it is to harm me. He pulls in my energy, and I know he does, and attempts to damage it, maybe damaging my DNA, I'm not sure. Which is so easy to do because, you see, I'm an empath. But am I not at fault for not putting up sufficient barriers? When we first moved into our home in Jakarta, we didn't use any protection for it. And I think that's a little like not locking our doors. Whilst we can blame burglars for breaking in, most would also consider us irresponsible for not locking their doors. So why is it not irresponsible for not using magical protection? Indeed, by living in the house that he believes is his, it could be likened to walking through the ghetto with a Rolex on your arm. Putting salt down when we believe there's a lot of paranormal activity is an obvious protection. There are many others you can use depending on your beliefs. But I also used frame verses from Al-Quran, in particular ayat Al-Kursi, which I can recommend. But, whatever is your belief system, go with that. In general, magical attacks simply exacerbate existing physical and mental problems we have. So now I get conjunctivitis and Singapore ear, a fungal infection. This is followed by rheumatism, which is indicative of the body's immune system trying to heal itself. But in the past, I've had severe gout, water retention, including very bloated legs, a meningitis-like episode, and severe rheumatism, that so severe I'd been unable to walk for many days. And this repeated itself every year, once a year. I was actually affected for months every year, but for a few days I was completely incapacitated. So incapacitated I couldn't even lie down without moving my legs. And this is the reason we need to look after our health, especially when we know that we're under magical attack. But when I'm under magical attack, I need to smoke, as this allows me to better feel what's happening. I know some of you will be shouting, no, it doesn't. It does. It does. I seem to be able to tap into what's going on much better if I smoke. Maybe it's simply my subconscious being stimulated. But of course, me smoking too much brings with it its own problems. Again, am I not in part to blame for not looking after my health? So much of what we experience in life is due to intergenerational curses and karma. Therefore, often when we're attacked, it simply builds on these intergenerational issues. Indeed, that's maybe the real reason why we're experiencing black magic. If this is the case, then simple protection is not enough. We need to resolve this intergenerational karma. Responding to magic. So how should we react when we're under attack from black magic? Well, the normal reaction we have in the West is normally the worst possible reaction. Anger will exacerbate the effects of the malevolence. No, love is the response. As I found, we need to learn to control our emotions, particularly our fear. Indeed, I often wonder if black magic works at all, and it's simply the fear of the unknown that creates its effects. But there's also serious ethical issues in terms of how you respond to it. If somebody's trying to kill you with magic, and we know people are, is it ethical to send it back? How would you feel if you know somebody had died as a result of sending magic back to them? I don't have an answer to that, but it's an issue that you will have to go through yourself if you are in the same circumstances as me. Is there a difference between returning black magic and physical violence? Now, when we first understood we were being attacked, I reacted as any Westerner would. Indeed, my wife had recently bought a Golok knife, and there was one episode, maybe under the influence of possession, but I was threatening to run outside and kill the neighbour with the Golok knife as he sat outside our home, cursing us. And of course, the magic would have worked, because I almost certainly would have been incarcerated and maybe shot as a result of that. So it's just a circle of evil, if you want to call it. Now, we're currently in Jakarta where we're experiencing this, but we're in Jakarta after our Dukun brothers family moved from magic to physically harming our property. Now, you might see it as relatively minor, but they created holes in our house so that they could put rats into them, and our house became rat infested. And now, you might think it's minor, but it seemed to us like a seismic shift. Even though the magic was aimed at destroying my wife's mind and maybe killing her, this was physical. And as I say, whilst maybe they were trying to kill us, the rats only damaged some furniture and furnishings, but it did feel different. And that's part of the reason why we're now in Jakarta. In addition, we've been poisoned many, many times. Often this is simply being given food which has been cursed, but then this is the most effective way of getting malevolence into somebody's body. But the most sustained attack was the cumulative ingestion of lead, and in particular lead acetate. Lead seems to mimic the effects of paranormal attack, maybe even exacerbating it. But is lead poisoning black magic or simple criminality? We went from Dukun to Paustad across the island of Java looking for a solution. And now I understand that we should never trust those who offer to send back the magic. So how do we respond? Sorry, I ought to say before I say to this, if we release things over to the universe, karma you might like to call it, it has a way of balancing things. So the magic, it won't necessarily return, but the universe will seek balance. So you don't even need to resort to this sending back. But how should we ourselves respond? Well, what we found is we can only focus on our physical, mental and spiritual well-being, which means ignoring the physical forces we can neither control nor comprehend. The physical effects we have all suffered are merely a reflection of our own internal struggle, which we might like to characterise as a struggle between good and evil. So maybe our experience of black magic is something we're actually creating within ourselves. You may be aware that sometimes I'm accused of sihir or sorcery and shirk polytheism for my series on this channel about Shams al-Marif. But it feels like this is being done by people who are fearful of the unknown, fearful of even discussing the paranormal, fearful of debate. In fact, as soon as you try to debate, they selectively quote from an English translation of Al-Quran or Al-Hadith. Now, maybe these fears come from a distrust of their fellow man, than what they would claim to be a fear that I, who is a complete stranger, will go to hell. I don't want to argue, as scientists do, that science is neutral and therefore so is magic. But if we're not concerned about those who will use it and how they will use it, then what have we got to fear? The very best way to fight black magic is actually not to believe in it. Indeed, it's my experience that the effects of black magic are largely psychological, which can then manifest themselves in physical and mental health issues. So maybe our collective amnesia in the West is actually a powerful strategy whose reason is now lost, and it's simply amnesia. It's much better to visit a doctor and take Western medicines, despite me not really believing in their efficacy. But if we believe in them, for the rheumatism, the hot flushes, etc. that we get, than to dwell on black magic possession and the symptoms. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this vlog, and if you have, can you help me out a little? Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and then you'll be notified of future vlogs. But also hit the like button and make a comment, because these seem to be what determine the YouTube algorithm, and I'm being really punished by it. So whatever help I can get from you is so appreciated. It really is. When I started this, I was going to do it this section, the real magic of Java. I was going to issue maybe every 2-3 months. Now it's happening maybe every 2 or 3 days. So yeah, if you hit the bell, you'll hear about it. And thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Really heartfelt thanks.